Richard Zanuck was the most powerful man in Hollywood. He had greenlighted more hits than anyone in history. So when Clint Eastwood walked into his office with a script about an aging gunfighter seeking redemption, Zanuck did something he would regret for the rest of his life. He laughed. He called it the worst Western he'd ever read. He told Clint to stick to what he knew: action movies for teenagers. What happened over the next 2 years would humiliate Zanuck, shock the industry, and prove that sometimes the people who know the most about movies understand the least about storytelling. Clint Eastwood sat in the waiting room of Richard Zanuck's office for 45 minutes. This was deliberate. Zanuck made everyone wait. It was a power move, a reminder of who controlled Hollywood and who came begging for permission to make movies. Clint didn't mind. He used the time to review his notes, to think about how he would pitch the story he had been carrying for nearly 10 years. The script was called Unforgiven. He had received it in 1983 from a writer named David Webb Peoples. The moment Clint read it, he knew it was special. It was a Western, but not like any Western he had ever made. It was dark, violent, morally complex. It asked questions that most Westerns were afraid to ask. What happens to men who kill? What does violence do to the human soul? Can a man ever escape his past? Clint had wanted to make it immediately, but something held him back. He wasn't ready. He was still too young, too vital. The character William Money, a reformed killer dragged back into violence, needed to be played by someone who looked like death was waiting around the corner. So Clint waited. He bought the rights to the script and put it in a drawer. He made other movies. He got older. He watched his face change in the mirror, watched the years accumulate, watched himself become the man who could play William Money. Now, in 1991, he was ready. The only problem was convincing a studio to let him make it. The secretary finally called his name. Clint walked into Zanuck's office. It was enormous, bigger than most people's apartments. Windows overlooking the studio lot, awards on every surface, photographs with presidents, movie stars, royalty. Richard Zanuck sat behind a desk the size of a small boat. He was a compact man with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested he had heard every pitch ever conceived and found most of them boring. "Clint," Zanuck said, not standing. "Sit down. What have you got for me?" Clint took a seat and placed the script on the desk. "It's a Western," he said, "about an aging gunfighter named William Money. He was a killer, one of the worst. Murdered women, children, anyone who got in his way. Then he met a woman who changed him. He gave up the life, became a farmer, had kids. Sounds like a redemption story. It starts that way. But then his wife dies. He's broke. His farm is failing. And a young man shows up, offering him money to kill 2 cowboys who cut up a prostitute." Zanuck's expression didn't change. "So he goes back to killing. He tries not to. He tells himself it's just one job, just enough money to save his farm. But once you've been a killer, you can't just turn it off. The violence is still there, waiting." Clint paused. "It's about what violence really does to people. Not the Hollywood version where the hero shoots the bad guy and rides off into the sunset. The real version, where killing destroys something inside you that can never be fixed." Zanuck was silent for a moment. Then he picked up the script and flipped through it casually. "Who else is attached?" "Just me. I'm directing and starring. Budget? $14 million. That's low for a Western. I don't need a big budget. I need the right locations, the right cast, and time to do it right." Zanuck set down the script. "Clint, can I be honest with you?" Zanuck leaned back in his chair. "Westerns are dead. They've been dead for 20 years. The last Western that made money was what? Silverado? And even that was a disappointment. This isn't like other Westerns. They all say that." Zanuck shook his head. "Look, you've had a great career. Dirty Harry. The good, the bad, and the ugly. But those were action movies. This," he tapped the script, "this is an art film pretending to be a Western. It's a story about a real human being, It's a story about a depressed old man who kills people and feels bad about it. That's not entertainment. That's therapy. Clint's jaw tightened. You haven't even read it. I don't need to read it. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what works and what doesn't. Zanuck pushed the script back across the desk. Stick to what you know, Clint. Make another cop movie. Make another action picture. Leave the serious drama to people who understand it. People like who? Zanuck smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. People who went to film school. People who understand narrative structure and character development. Not cowboys who got lucky in Italy. The room went cold. Clint stood up slowly. He picked up the script. You're making a mistake, Richard. Zanuck laughed. Actually laughed, a dismissive, condescending sound that echoed off the walls of his enormous office. I've been hearing that for 30 years. Still waiting for someone to prove it. Clint walked out without another word. Over the next 6 months, Clint pitched Unforgiven to every major studio in Hollywood. Universal passed. They said it was too dark for mainstream audiences. Paramount passed. They wanted to change the ending, have William Money find redemption instead of descending further into violence. Clint refused. Columbia passed. They offered to make it if Clint would cast a younger actor in the lead. Someone more marketable. Clint refused again. Fox passed. Disney passed. MGM didn't even return his calls. The word spread through the industry. Clint Eastwood was trying to make an uncommercial art film about an old gunfighter, and nobody wanted any part of it. Agents whispered to their clients to stay away. Producers warned each other not to get involved. The script that Clint had carried for 10 years became a punchline at industry parties. Did you hear about Eastwood's Western? The one where the hero is a drunk who cries about killing people? I heard Zanuck laughed him out of the office. Someone should tell him the 70s are over. Nobody wants to see depressing movies anymore. Clint heard the rumors. He heard the laughter. He understood that Hollywood had decided he was finished, a relic from another era, trying to make movies that nobody wanted to see. It didn't matter. He was going to make this film even if he had to finance it himself. Warner Brothers called in February 1992. A young executive named Terry Semel had read the script. Unlike everyone else in Hollywood, he actually understood what Clint was trying to do. It's brilliant, Semel said during their first meeting. It's a deconstruction of everything Westerns are supposed to be. The hero isn't heroic. The violence isn't glamorous. It's honest in a way that movies haven't been honest in years. Clint studied the younger man. You know, everyone else passed on this. I know. You know, Zanuck called it the worst Western he'd ever read. Zanuck's an idiot. Semel smiled. Don't tell him I said that. Why do you want to make it? Semel leaned forward. Because I think you're right. I think audiences are ready for something different. All these action movies, all these sequels and franchises, people are getting tired of it. They want to feel something real. The budget is $14 million. I'll give you 16. You can have final cut. You can shoot wherever you want. Cast whoever you want. Just make the movie you want to make. Clint shook Semel's hand. For the first time in nearly a year, he felt hope. They shot Unforgiven in Alberta, Canada, in the summer of 1992. Clint assembled a cast that believed in the project as much as he did. Gene Hackman signed on to play Little Bill Daggett, the brutal sheriff. Morgan Freeman took the role of Ned Logan, Money's old partner. Richard Harris came aboard as English Bob, a legendary gunfighter with a gift for self-promotion. The shoot was difficult. The weather was unpredictable, bright sunshine 1 hour, torrential rain the next. The locations were remote, requiring hours of travel each day. The subject matter was emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. But something special was happening. The actors could feel it. The crew could feel it. Every day, every scene, they were creating something that mattered. Gene Hackman later said it was the best script he had ever read. Little Bill is a monster, he explained, but he doesn't know it. He thinks he's the good guy. That's what makes him terrifying. Morgan Freeman called the shoot transformative. He had never worked with a director who trusted his actors so completely. Clint would set up the scene, explain what he was looking for, and then step back and let the performers find their own truth. He doesn't overdirect, Freeman said. He creates an environment where you can do your best work. That's rare. Clint himself said almost nothing during the production. He was focused, intense, completely absorbed in bringing William Money to life. But at night, after the cameras stopped rolling, he would sometimes sit alone and think about Zanuck, about the laughter in that enormous office, about all the people who had told him this movie would never work. He was going to prove them wrong. Post-production took 3 months. Clint worked with his editor, Joel Cox, to shape the footage into something that felt both intimate and epic. They stripped away anything that felt unnecessary exposition, backstory, moments that explained too much. Trust the audience, Clint kept saying. They don't need to be told what to feel. They need to be shown. The music was minimal. The cinematography was muted, almost colorless in places. The violence was quick and ugly, nothing like the choreographed gunfights of traditional westerns. When Clint watched the final cut, he knew they had succeeded. The movie worked. It was everything he had hoped it would be: brutal, beautiful, and deeply, painfully human. Now he just had to convince audiences to see it. Warner Brothers held a test screening in Pasadena. 300 people, random moviegoers, selected from shopping malls and supermarkets, filed into a theater to watch a movie they knew nothing about. All they had been told was that it was a Western starring Clint Eastwood. Clint sat in the back row, invisible in the darkness, watching the audience react. For the first hour, they were restless. The movie was slow by Hollywood standards. There were long stretches of dialogue, quiet moments where nothing seemed to happen. A few people got up to use the bathroom. A few checked their watches. But as the story built toward its climax, as William Money descended back into the darkness he had tried so hard to escape, the audience went still. They weren't checking their watches anymore. They weren't whispering to their neighbors. They were completely absorbed, watching a man's soul come apart on screen. When the final scene played, Money standing in the rain, surrounded by the bodies of the men he had killed, already dead inside. Even though his heart was still beating, the theater was silent. The credits rolled. No one moved. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started in one corner and spread until the entire theater was clapping, some people openly crying. The test scores came back the next morning. They were the highest Warner Brothers had seen in years. Unforgiven opened on the 7th of August 1992. It was a modest release, 2,000 screens. No massive marketing campaign. Warner Brothers was hopeful, but cautious. Westerns had failed before. Even good westerns had failed before. But something unexpected happened. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. People who saw the movie told their friends. Critics who had been skeptical became passionate advocates. Within 2 weeks, Unforgiven had expanded to 3,000 screens and was still selling out shows. The reviews were unlike anything Clint had ever received. Roger Ebert called it a masterpiece, one of the best films of the year, and one of the best westerns ever made. The New York Times called it a profound meditation on violence and its consequences. Even critics who had dismissed Clint for years were forced to acknowledge what he had achieved. Eastwood has made serious films before, one wrote, but Unforgiven is on another level entirely. It's the kind of film that changes how we think about an entire genre. By the end of its theatrical run, Unforgiven had grossed over $150 million worldwide, more than 10 times its budget. But the money wasn't what mattered to Clint. What mattered was what happened next. The Academy Award nominations were announced in February 1993. Unforgiven received 9 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman, and Best Original Screenplay. It was the most nominations for a Western since Dances with Wolves 2 years earlier. And unlike Dances with Wolves, which had been a sweeping epic designed to appeal to Academy voters, Unforgiven was a dark, violent deconstruction of everything the Western genre was supposed to represent. The fact that Academy members had embraced it anyway said something about what Clint had accomplished. On the night of the ceremony, Clint sat in the audience with his cast and crew. He didn't expect to win. He had been nominated before and lost. He knew how the Academy worked. They loved to nominate unconventional choices, but rarely gave them the top prizes. Gene Hackman won Best Supporting Actor. That wasn't a surprise. His performance as Little Bill was widely considered the best work of his career. Then came Best Director. Clint heard his name called. He walked to the stage in a daze, accepted the Oscar, and gave a brief, understated speech thanking the cast and crew. Then came Best Picture. When Unforgiven was announced as the winner, the audience erupted. It was the first Western to win Best Picture in 60 years. It was validation for everything Clint had believed about the project, everything the industry had told him was wrong. He thought about Zanuck, about the laugh in that enormous office, about all the rejection letters and past calls and whispered insults. He didn't mention any of it in his acceptance speech. He didn't need to. The Oscar in his hand said everything. Richard Zanuck read about the Oscar wins in the newspaper. He was at his vacation home in Aspen, recovering from a studio merger that had left him with less power than he had enjoyed in years. The industry was changing. The old guard was being pushed aside by younger executives with different ideas about what audiences wanted. Zanuck had been certain he understood movies better than anyone. He had built his career on that certainty. He had laughed at Clint Eastwood because he was absolutely convinced that Unforgiven would fail. Now that script he had dismissed was winning Best Picture. The man he had condescended to was standing on stage, holding the industry's highest honor. Zanuck's wife found him sitting alone in his study, staring at the wall. "Richard, are you all right?" "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I was completely wrong." "About what?" "About Eastwood, about the movie, about everything." He never publicly acknowledged his mistake. His pride wouldn't allow it. But privately, for the rest of his life, he would think about that meeting, about the laugh, about what he had cost himself by being so certain he was right. In the years that followed, Unforgiven was studied in film schools around the world. Critics and scholars analyzed every frame, every line of dialogue, every choice Clint had made. They wrote about how it deconstructed the mythology of the American West. They wrote about how it subverted audience expectations at every turn. They wrote about how it forced viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about violence and masculinity. But what they wrote about most was the ending. William Money, having killed the sheriff and his deputies, rides out of town in the rain. A title card tells us he disappeared, possibly went to San Francisco, prospered in dry goods. His wife's grave remains on the farm, visited by her mother who never understood what her daughter saw in a known thief and murderer. It was ambiguous, unresolved. It offered no redemption, no punishment, no easy moral lesson. And that's what made it brilliant. Most Westerns end with the hero riding off into the sunset, one critic wrote. Unforgiven ends with a man riding into the rain, carrying the weight of everything he's done. There's no sunset, there's no triumph, there's just the truth. Luft. Clint rarely talked about the movie in interviews. When asked about Zanuck's rejection, he would shrug and change the subject. But once, late in his career, he offered a glimpse of what he had learned. "The people who tell you something can't be done are almost always wrong," he said. "They're not trying to help you. They're trying to protect themselves, protect their own beliefs about how the world works. When someone laughs at your idea, that's not a reason to stop. That's a reason to keep going." He paused. "The best revenge is making something great. The world changes, opinions change. People forget who said what. But great work lasts forever." Clint Eastwood kept the director's chair from Unforgiven in his office for the rest of his career. It was worn and faded, the canvas frayed from years of use. He had sat in it during every setup, every take, every difficult decision. Visitors to his office would sometimes ask about it. He would tell them it was from his favorite film, the one everyone said would never work. "Why is it your favorite?" they would ask. And Clint would smile, that thin, knowing smile. "Because I almost didn't make it. I almost listened to the people who said it was a bad idea. If I had, I would have regretted it every day for the rest of my life. He would look at the chair, remembering. That chair reminds me that the only opinion that matters is your own. Experts can be wrong. Studios can be wrong. The smartest people in the room can be the most blind. He would turn back to his visitor. Make the thing you believe in. Fight for it. Don't let anyone laugh you out of the room. The chair stayed in his office until the day he retired. A reminder, a trophy, a symbol of what happens when you refuse to give up on a story that matters. Richard Zanuck laughed at that script. The movie that followed won everything, and Clint Eastwood had the last laugh after all.